Today, John Oxley and I welcome Zoe Merchant to the Conveners podcast. Currently managing the lung cancer screening programme across Greater Manchester and a key driver of the GM Active GM Cancer award-winning Prehab for Cancer programme. A fascinating insight into not only this programme from a perspective not heard before, but also a wider examination of Zoe's thoughts on how leisure and health can work together more effectively in the future. I know you'll enjoy this one.
Hi Zoe, thanks very much and thanks for your time today coming to meet myself and Mr. John Oxley at the Conveners podcast. It's lovely to see you. It's been a while, to be fair.
It has been a while,
apart from Teams calls from time to time. So thank you very much. To start things off, Zoe, can you just tell us a little bit about your career to date in a nutshell? And probably the golden thread running through it is physical activity. How's that played a role both in your career and alongside that in your personal life?
Yeah, of course. So my background is I'm an occupational therapist. So I started my career in the NHS in 2008, a long time ago. And as an occupational therapist, I mainly worked in rehabilitation. My speciality for many years was neuro rehab. And then as I moved into more managerial roles, I was given this fantastic opportunity to work with Dr. John Moore, who's a clinical anaesthetist in the NHS, and the GM Cancer Alliance in Greater Manchester, going about offering rehabilitation to cancer patients. So that's people who are due to have cancer treatment, them actually being engaged in various interventions, exercise, nutrition, well-being interventions, to optimise them as they go through their cancer treatment. And in doing so, was able to forge that relationship with GM Active and all the leisure organisations across Greater Manchester, who were pivotal in the delivery of that programme. So going from that point on, we were able to get that service up and running. It was a GM-wide system delivery of rehabilitation and rehabilitation. It's become world leading in terms of that model of exercise delivery. We've had, coming up for 5,000 patients go through the programme. So it's been a fantastic thing to be involved in. Because it was a transformation project, I was the programme lead for a few years, and then I pivoted into being the Allied Health Professional lead. And my day job now is that I manage the Targeted Lung Health Tech programme in Greater Manchester, which is lung cancer screening. Right. But I'm very much still involved in the prehab service, and as well as doing that nationally, I'm involved in the Macmillan Allied Health Professional Expert Advisory Group, and I'm involved in a lot of the national and international prehab discussions in the kind of healthcare and academic routes. So that's kind of career-wise. Yeah. From a personal perspective, exercise is something that previously I had a very kind of limited relationship with. I didn't do much exercise when I was a kid, walks, bike rides. Through my 20s, did a little bit now and again. But it was really when I became a mum, I started to get more into running. And then it kind of coincided with doing the prehab stuff. And I really switched on to how important exercise was. Right. Just seeing it for the benefits it brought for cancer patients, and really believing in the message of movement is medicine, and, exercise is equivalent to a kind of, to a medicine essentially. And so for myself, I took up running, and over the last few years, I've done a couple of marathons, and so running's now one of my main hobbies, and my support groups are via my running. It's something I feel really passionate about, and I do it partly because it keeps me sane on a day-to-day. But I do really believe in the quality of life benefits it brings, the well-being benefits it brings, the health benefits in terms of, I've seen it in terms of the evidence that we've looked at for prehab. Yeah. So to me, it's a no-brainer. And I mean, I may have got more into exercise anyway, but I really do believe that because of the work we've done on the prehab scheme, it was that extra thing that made me say, do you know what, I really should be doing something more myself. And I haven't really looked back from that, really. I like cycling and other things as well, and yoga and strength, but running's my main exercise that I do.
Got one in the can for this year?
Yeah, so doing York Marathon in October, doing Wilmslow.
Sounds hilly.
Is
it? No?
Doing Wilmslow half marathon in a couple of weeks.
Nice.
So I'm trying to go for a sub 2 hour PB.
Oh, good luck.
Oh, fingers crossed. So it's that's but yeah, I love it. I'm very passionate about what we do with the prehab program because I just know it works. And I don't just know it works because I've read all the academic papers and because I know what the evidence base is. I know it works because I live it and breathe it myself. I know the impact it has if I've gone for a run compared to if I hadn't gone for a run. Yeah. And certainly, for example, for cancer patients, one of the biggest problems that they have is that emotional journey of having a cancer diagnosis and going through treatment, the fatigue, the anxiety, low mood, all of that. And as much as I'm not suggesting that I'm going through anything that might be similar to a cancer patient, because I am not, but equally, I think as a human being, it's just empirically proven that if you engage in exercise, you are going to get those benefits in terms of improved mood, reduction in anxiety, better well-being, a sense of calm, a sense of empowerment, all of that. Yeah. And I see that in myself, and I can see then how it's so important to make sure that we're able to offer that for people who are going through a pathway such as a cancer pathway. Yeah,
brilliant, great stuff, and good luck with the marathon and a half. We'll get into prehab in a bit of detail because again, lots of people in our sector probably know about it, but I don't think they've ever heard from you and your role, which I know is incredibly vital, and your perspective really on it. And then equally your perspective as we go through today to about the leisure sector generally from sitting where you sit. And so that's been an exceptionally useful introduction. Over to you, Joel.
I mean, it was a joy to listen to you speak so passionately about, the thing that we so believe in, Zoe. I suppose one of the things that I'm keen to understand, perhaps building on that, is, what gets you to leap out of bed in the morning, apart from children probably. What gives you the sort of clarity of purpose to continue to sort of drive in terms of your career or yourself personally, and the effort and commitment you give to your organisation?
So there's a few things. The running is one of those things because I often go for a run at 6:30 a.m. with a group of people that I meet. So I'm part of Gatley Runners, giving a little shout out to Gatley Runners. So actually, the alarm going off at 6:10. One of my friends I run with always says, if you just stick your foot out of the bed, then you will do it. You just got to stick your foot out of the bed, and then you're going to go.
Good advice.
So yeah, start most days like that. But in terms of what gets me out of bed, I've always. It doesn't matter which part of the NHS I've worked in or any part of my career, but it's always been about improving people's lives. Yeah. And that's always been the mainstay of what I've been doing. I've had roles in the past where I've worked in very sad situations, like work with people with dementia, and it's always been incredibly difficult. I found those roles hard when you feel like you're not really making an impact or making a difference, and actually all you're seeing is a deterioration. So the roles I've always leaned to are more the ones where you can see the improvement, you can see the positive impact it's having. And certainly with prehab, it absolutely gets me out of bed that I know that every single patient I've ever spoken to who's been through the service, or every healthcare professional I've spoken to who's had a patient who's talked to them about it, it's always positive. Cancer, it's a negative topic. It unfortunately, because of what it is, you picture suffering, you picture depression, you picture a negative pathway. Whereas to speak to people and they're smiling and they're positive and they're talking about the benefits it's had. I mean, that's the reason why I go to work. That's the reason why I get out of bed. Because I know that something that I'm doing is directly offering up that opportunity for people. And it's the same with all healthcare. I mean, I was talking to a friend the other day because what I'm doing in my day job at the moment, we're finding lung cancer early, and as a result, we're saving people's lives. And I think she doesn't work in the NHS and has never worked in the NHS. And I think in her head, she was like, well, surely that's the purpose of everybody who works in the NHS. But I suppose to make the distinction, lots of roles in the NHS, yes, that's the overarching aim, but you don't always get to have such a direct impact on that. You're contributing to something, but both in the work I do with lung cancer screening, but also the work I do with prehab, I feel like I'm not the person stood in front of the patient, but I am having a really instrumental impact on improving people's lives and actually saving people's lives and extra life years. And that is, I mean, if I, you know, when I retire eventually, to be able to look back and think that we've done that is huge.
Yeah.
You know, like in terms of when I started my career before I became an occupational therapist, I actually worked for a private company, and the sole focus of that company was about making money. I did it as a graduate scheme, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I did it, stuck it out for 2 years. And the values of that company, it was all about money. And I just knew it wasn't my values. And then when I found the NHS and occupational therapy, it just all clicked because, you know, ultimately my values, I've always wanted to try and support people and improve their lives. So yeah, that's a bit of a long-winded response to that question, but that's ultimately what it's about.
Because, you know, I mean, we if we can get our personal values to align with our workplace values, then, you know, work doesn't become work, does it? It becomes, you know, just part of it.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like work. It feels like you're contributing to something purposeful.
When I was solely working on prehab for the 2 years that I was, it didn't feel like work. No. In some ways, it was a bit negative because it took over my life. Like all my friends, my family, my husband, you know, I was so wrapped up in it because it was such an exciting project. And it was such, you know, it's amazing, not just because of what it was, but because, again, going back to what we were aiming for and the fact that we were achieving those things that we're aiming for. It wasn't just wouldn't it be nice to do this? It was like, well, we're going to do it and we're doing it. You know, we've done it for 2,000 people. And so in some ways, for a bit of work-life balance, it was actually good when I was able to take a little bit of a step back and still be heavily involved, but it wasn't like my every waking thought was about rehabilitation.
So let's dive into it a little bit then. So just for those who don't know, can you just briefly describe what prehab is and what was the origins of it?
Yeah.
Great.
So the idea is, and interesting with the marathon analogy, but you wouldn't run a marathon without doing some training, essentially. That's the long and the short of it. So when we think about the treatments that we put people with cancer through, you know, surgery, radiotherapy, immunotherapy, chemotherapy, these are radical treatments and it's an onslaught on the person's body. And very simply, if you're going to put someone through those treatments at the level where you've got nothing extra, you're not doing anything extra to try and build that person up, the likelihood is that the outcomes they're going to achieve are going to be less. They're not going to do as well through the treatment. They're going to experience more symptoms. They might have more complications. Whereas what the evidence shows is that if you think about increasing someone's strength, if you think about increasing someone's cardiovascular fitness, if you think about making sure that nutritionally they're in a good place, that, you know, they're not malnourished, if you think about their well-being and from a psychological perspective, if they're in a good place, they are going to do better when they go through their treatment. They're going to have better outcomes. They're going to reduce complications. I mean, what we've shown, because we've done a very robust evaluation ourselves, is that they're going to have less time in hospital. They don't need to be in hospital for as long. And if you ask any patient what they want, most of them say they don't want to be in hospital for a long period of time. They want to get home. They want to be back to normal. And so what this does is it allows people to get back to normal quicker. And really, it's not just the prehab bit. There is the rehab bit afterwards. And actually what the evidence shows is that you can't just do prehab. You need to do prehab and rehab. Yeah. But yeah, essentially it's the optimization of a person so that then any medical interventions that we do are going to be absolutely optimized, as opposed to doing them and really not touching the sides and knowing that you're actually potentially going to cause more harm potentially. So
yeah. Now, you've mentioned Dr. John Moore, so you can maybe refer to him again if you like, but what's your role been in the programme to date?
So originally I was kind of the project manager, programme lead, and so it was my responsibility to actually get the whole thing off the ground, but not by myself. Very much it was a team effort, just to be really clear. So colleague Kirsty Rollison-Groves, who was leading it more from the GM Active leisure side, but absolutely instrumental, the person actually getting the service off the ground and up and running. And then there was yourself, Andy, and Pete Burt, and other colleagues from GM Active. So we had a steering group, we had implementation groups, and I was the person overseeing all of that, really, putting all of that together, all the governance, all that, making sure that it was actually progressing, sorting out the contracts we had with the NHS, all of that stuff. That was what I was doing. And John, who I've mentioned and you mentioned, he was the person, the brainchild of it, really. So he was the person who was aware of the literature, aware of the evidence base that was growing. A lot of it was based within perioperative medicine, which is that idea about preparing people for surgery, which obviously anaesthetists, you may or may not realise, but a lot of them are very focused on that workup of a patient before they go for surgery. That's part of their role. So he was leading it clinically and very much the design of what was required. And then I was there working with him. But I wasn't just a project manager. I was also bringing a lot of my expertise around having delivered rehabilitation myself in the community, and what a community service looks like, and thinking about applying established rehabilitation models onto pre-rehabilitation. So it was a really lovely relationship. And I mean, John's been instrumental in my career, and we work very closely even now, because he's got the medical view, I've got the allied health professional view. And then it's been brilliant then to bring in the view of exercise professionals and specialists that we've had from GM Active.
Yeah, dream team. Let's unpack the funding.
Yeah.
So can you tell us the way that the program's been funded initially, and then how it went on, and your role, Zoe, in that funding, please?
Absolutely. So originally, there was what was called transformation funding that NHS England had provided. And in GM Greater Manchester, we were lucky because a long time ago, we were devolved. So instead of NHS England saying, this is your money, you've got to spend it on this, this and this, there's the GM as a conurbation were given an amount of money, and then it was down to GM as to how that money was spent. And so there was a portion of that for the Cancer Alliance, which is the cancer part of the Greater Manchester area. And then a portion of that, we had Dave Shackley and Clara Rourke, who's the medical and managing director of the Cancer Alliance, both passionately believe in exercise and the power of exercise, and absolutely believed in what John was suggesting. So a portion of money was given for the pre-ab for cancer delivery. And so essentially we had that money to get us started, and that was a 2-year amount of money. Unfortunately, COVID hit us on the way.
Oh, yeah.
So we did have to, and again, Kirsty and the team did a brilliant job. But then we were coming to the end of our funding, and we needed to demonstrate the actual impact. So part of the project and the money, because it was the short-term money, was about demonstrating and evaluating. And did we say what we said it was going to do? Did it do it?
Yeah.
So what we did was, because of the arrangements and because of COVID, we were able to provide an interim evaluation, which secured us recurrent funding from the NHS system in Greater Manchester, which was having to go and speak to every single commissioner.
You did.
Having to speak to every single commissioner, because at the time, and sorry to bore everyone, but previously, obviously, we had the CCGs, clinical commissioning groups. So every locality had a CCG, and it was down to each CCG to make a decision as to whether or not they were going to fund this service recurrently. Because one of the things that we did in our design of the service was, we didn't want a postcode lottery, which a lot of services, there is a postcode lottery as to who gets what. So we wanted it to be a Greater Manchester service, which is what it was, and GM Active enabled us to do that. But that meant that when it came to getting the money agreed, it was an all or nothing approach. We needed that every CCG had to agree to the money, and which ultimately, through lots of conversations, lots of evidence that both I presented, that was given from the team, of demonstrating patient benefit. And so then we got the decision that we would get that recurrent funding, but it was based on an independent evaluation being completed. So about 6 months later, when everything had settled down with COVID, we were able to commission a commissioning support unit based in Bristol to do that independent evaluation, and they did it, and we absolutely smashed it. For example, showing 3 times return on investment for what we pay for prehab versus what we see released within the healthcare system. There was some suggestion of improved survival and improved life years, reduced number of hospital days across the board, better quality of life. every single measure that we suggested we would have improvements on, we were able to demonstrate improvements.
Yeah,
So,
fantastic. And it shouldn't be underestimated, the work, and I only know a snapshot of it, but that you yourself put in to make sure that I suppose that funding model was understood, because I think I'm right in saying there was a bit of a pushback from local areas saying, well, maybe this is just another referral program and maybe it could be funded in different ways. Is that right?
absolutely. So I think that obviously in all the areas that exist already, there's brilliant services that are available. And I think as much as we did a lot of stakeholder engagement, a lot of work and trying to make people understand what it was that we were offering, to some people who weren't as close to the project as others, I think in their heads it was just another exercise referral scheme. It just, and actually we already pay for an exercise referral scheme. So why do we need to pay for this extra thing over here? Surely patients can just go to that. And there's lots of different ways of approaching this, especially in a cash-strapped society. I think we do need to be really careful about not duplicating work. However, the key thing for us was that with cancer patients, there's very specific needs that they have. The fact that they're going to go through treatment, that they've had a diagnosis, they're going to go through treatment, and it's potentially life-threatening. It meant that we really did need to think about the components of the interventions. And also, we needed to gain the trust of the healthcare professionals who were doing the referrals into this program. And a lot of that was based on the skills and the expertise and the upskilling we did with all the prehab for cancer instructors who had already done a lot of training themselves. Most of them hold degrees, and most of them do most level 4 training. But we really had to communicate to the NHS of the value that these people had, what they were going to be doing for these patients. This wasn't just an ordinary generic rehab program. This was a very clearly designed program that was aimed at addressing all the needs of a cancer patient, working with people who were experts in working with people with cancer.
Yeah.
So we really did have to explain that and provide the evidence for that.
Yeah, and did it very well. And in terms, you mentioned the staff there. How are they treated? So often we talk about the credibility of fitness professionals, for want of a better term, with health in general. How do the prehab team actually integrate successfully with health colleagues?
So I think that, sadly, it's always the way of the world. I think often we're judged based on what we deliver, aren't we? So, unfortunately, you've got to earn your stripes.
Yeah.
And what's been brilliant about the delivery of the service is the fact that all of the instructors that work within the Prehab for Cancer service, they've all absolutely won over all the healthcare professionals that they work with and all the patients that they work with. They're professional, they're experts, they do continued professional development, the way that they communicate with people, it's really clear the skills and the knowledge that they have, and they're very respectful. And also one of the key points is that they've got a very can-do attitude. So I think, unfortunately, sometimes within the NHS, people can be quite jaded and it's easier to say no than yes sometimes.
Right.
Whereas in the whole setup of the service, I never really ever heard the word no. It was always, yes, we can do that. And I think that some of the things we've done, for example, they sit within multidisciplinary teams within the hospital healthcare. So meetings that I had about patients, we've got a Prehab for Cancer instructor sat in those meetings contributing based on what they know about patients. We've got a service based at Wivenshaw Hospital called the One Stop Clinic. And this is about how we assess lung cancer patients when they're first diagnosed and help them to make a decision about what treatment they should have. And the Prehab for Cancer instructors are an integral component of that clinic, alongside members of the hospice, Macmillan nurses, surgeons, physicians, it's across the board, and they're seen as just as important as anyone else in that room.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing to see because I know that, there's a lot of conversation and thought about the qualifications of these instructors and whether they should be considered to be an allied health professional, whether they should be how they're registered.
Yes.
Because, that is currency in terms of careers, in terms of the workforce of healthcare in the NHS.
Yeah.
And I think that it's been brilliant to see that alongside what we've done within prehab, similar in pulmonary rehab, cardiac rehab, we've got this workforce of incredibly knowledgeable and skilled staff members. And actually, we've got a workforce crisis in the NHS. the number of patients that have needs is not met by the number of healthcare professionals and allied healthcare professionals that exist.
Yeah.
And there's obviously different pay scales as well. And so in some ways, making sure that these exercise professionals, that people are aware of them, they're aware of what they're capable of and what they can offer and the value that they offer. It answers so many questions and issues that we have across the board when it comes to healthcare delivery.
Yeah, fantastic answer, Zoe. And I can't help but think of Mike Farrar, UK Active, sort of objectives of us in our sector supporting the NHS. And here's a real life example where that's exactly what's happening. And I guess the CPD, because the guys go off to the Christie, don't they, and get support, and they're dealing with people who are dealing with life and death.
Yeah.
Death rather. So yeah, it's incredibly a great example. So before we there's a lot there, isn't there, John, which I'll hand over to you in a minute to think about how this can translate into the sector more widely. What's the future for Prehab for Cancer? What's the aspirations?
So there's a few different things. At the moment, we're only offering the service to some groups of people with cancer. So depending on what type of cancer they've had, lung, colorectal, esophagogastric cancers, there's a whole load of other patients who have different types of cancers that would benefit from rehabilitation. And that we absolutely need to find a way of making sure that they can access the service. And that is a lot of it comes down to funding and having funding available. But I think the other thing is understanding that we need to be very focused on the needs of the patient, and not everyone needs the same. So like, for example, somebody like me, I'm a marathon runner, I dare say it. Yeah. If I got cancer tomorrow, it's not that I wouldn't have any needs. It would be brilliant to meet with the Prehab Cancer team and have some guidance on what I should be doing, especially because there's a likelihood I'm going to deteriorate. However, I wouldn't need that targeted, supervised sessions 2 or 3 times a week. I probably would just need a bit of guidance and be able to do a lot independently because I already exercise. Yeah. Whereas compare that to somebody who's deconditioned, hasn't exercised. It's not something that they feel that they particularly know how to do. They don't, the self-efficacy around exercise is not necessarily there. Those people need that hands-on approach. And also we've got different ages, and there's things like digital literacy. So it's understanding for some people, especially the younger generations, naturally, if they're going to think about how they engage in something, it's via an app, it's via their phone, it's via their, iPad, whatever it is. Yeah. So I think the future is, how do we use digital technology? How do we stratify patients more so that we're actually providing a needs-based service? I talked about the rehab element, and I think that we know that across the board, there's rehab needs, not just in cancer, in pulmonary rehab, in cardiac rehab. And so I think there's something about, if somebody's been through a pathway and then they need rehab, they don't necessarily need to be in a room just with other people who've had cancer. They could be in a room with people who've had a multitude of conditions. So actually, it might be that the rehabilitation is very focused around their condition, but the rehabilitation is much more focused around them as a person, regardless of what condition they have. Because let's face it, a lot of people nowadays, they have multiple conditions that need to be addressed. So I think that trying to provide efficiencies in what's already offered. So at the moment, the issue we have is that there's lots of people who are getting nothing. Whereas what would be better is thinking about how we reapportion the resource to make sure that everyone is getting something, but we're not watering down the quality of what the people who currently are getting something are getting.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that before, man. So thank you for that. In terms of the expansion possibly of the sort of model to other long-term conditions, it's been said that the cancer pathway was probably the easiest in the way that it's set up. Would you go along with that, or is that incorrect?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, one of the difficulties with cancer pathways is that, unfortunately, often patients go through various different hospitals, providers. So the way that it normally falls is a patient might go to their GP with some symptoms. They get referred to their local hospital for the first set of tests. And then depending on what's found, they might then start to need more specialist diagnostic tests. So they go to a new hospital. And then they might then, depending on whether they need surgery or whether they need radiotherapy, chemotherapy, they might go to another hospital. So in the course of a pathway, they might have gone to 3 or 4 different hospitals. And so when you're trying to implant prehab into that, some people would say that it should be delivered within the hospitals. And I absolutely say that is completely not the right approach, because actually by the time someone's got to the third or fourth hospital, are they getting their prehab or not? The fact that we're able to provide prehab to people in their local community, at a leisure centre, near to where they live, there's not the transport issues that a lot of patients unfortunately face. And also it starts to become a normalised thing that they're doing. They see their neighbours from down the road. Yeah. It's not, I'm a cancer patient. It's I'm somebody going to the gym. The confidence that builds, also the lifelong behavioural change that affords. Once somebody's left the NHS, they're not involved anymore in that cancer pathway as such, but they're still engaging in exercise. So I think cancer is complicated. I think perhaps it might be seen as simpler because of the need being so great.
Right.
Whereas I suppose in some other health condition pathways, I think enthusiasts like myself, we know that in most healthcare pathways, exercise is going to be of benefit, but it's really what's the hook for that? Yeah. Because it's really easy to say, oh, actually, if someone's going to go into a surgery, that you should do some exercise with them and get them fitted for that surgery. Yeah. It's different if you've got somebody who's had a stroke and you do rehabilitation with them, or somebody who's, had a heart attack, or somebody who's got early onset dementia or mental health problems. Again, we know the evidence base says that in all of those situations, exercise is going to bring benefit. Yeah. But what is the benefit that you're aiming for? Is it just a woolly general benefit, or is it very focused? And I think probably the idea of exercise in a cancer pathway is easier to sell. Right. Whereas I think in other healthcare conditions, perhaps it's, of course, exercise is good, but why does it have to be an integral component of our pathway that we're doing? Do you see what I mean?
I do. And we've got the evidence through the evaluation of prehab to say that it's very clear that the outcomes, if you like, and that return on that investment in the real world. Okay. So in terms of my last question on the prehab, probably, in terms of anybody listening to this, be they a leisure operator or an occupational therapist or whatever it might be, if somebody says that should be happening in my area, any ideas or tips how they could go about trying to recreate this? Can we help them? Can you help them? Or what's the situation?
So I think there is a lot of this happening in other areas already, and I think it's happening in different ways, different models. Some of it's about where people live, the geography. We're lucky in Greater Manchester because it's a conurbation. We've got 90 leisure facilities that just happen to be in all the places where people live. Yeah. If you went to Cornwall or the Lake District or Scotland, it is a different setup. So I think we need to be cognizant of that. Yeah. What I would definitely say for people who are living in England is contact your Cancer Alliance. Every region of the country has a Cancer Alliance with the intent about trying to improve outcomes for cancer patients. And so they are actually being asked by NHS England. It's a mandatory ask now that all Cancer Alliances in the next financial year will be saying what's happening around prehab in their area. Right. And if there is gaps, what's the plan to address those gaps? So your alliance should be aware of what is already available, and they should be taking an interest. If you're going saying, we can do something to help you with this, it should be something that's of interest to them. Wow. Equally, there's a lot of different, it's focusing on prehab. There's a lot of specialist groups. There's communities that you can join. There's a Q community that can be joined. So there's a lot of opportunity for healthcare professionals to get involved as well.
That's great advice. Thanks, Zoe.
Well, fascinating conversation, and really so important. One of the things that's striking me, obviously, is that the benefit of doing these podcasts is that we get the opportunity to bring different perspectives to the topic. And Andy and I have been leisure professionals we are professionals, aren't we?
Apparently.
For a long, long time. And of course, what we're trying to do just now is consider where we are as a sector. And I think we believe that and some of the terminology that you've used, though, is really interesting to me, because certainly we're trying to understand how we're going to be relevant and meaningful in the future. And to us at this moment in time, that relevance is around positioning ourselves as playing a role in preventative health and impacting population health generally. and seeking the collaborations that you've spoken about. And of course, prehab is such a profound, almost a beacon project in that respect. But we'll only be successful in that if we've got credibility, I suppose. And I'm interested in your perspective as to how health professionals view leisure professionals and our ability to contribute to in that preventative health agenda.
So I think it really depends on what exposure a healthcare professional's had to the leisure industry. I have to be really honest, before I got involved in the prehab work, I had a limited understanding of what leisure providers were offering. I probably had an awareness that there was some involvement in pulmonary rehab and cardiac rehab. But my understanding was limited. So I think education is really, really important. And if I'm honest, I think some of that education has to come from people like myself, other healthcare professionals who've shown huge benefits in working with the leisure industry and seeing the impact that the leisure industry can have. The way that healthcare professionals often work, a lot of it comes down to research, academia, finding the evidence base. We're all taught to be evidence-based practitioners, whether you're a doctor, a nurse, an allied health professional. So I think if there's really clear evidence of the work that's being done on leisure and the impact it has, I think that's really, really important. I think it is about the training and the education that's provided to your staff members, communication, again, like I say, that professional manner, which from my perspective, I've always seen that in all the people I've worked with, but I think that's really, really key. Sadly, I think some of this it's always going to be funding related, and I think there's going to be trends in where the funding goes. So even though within the NHS long-term plan, there is a big focus on prevention, because of the situation we find ourselves in financially within the NHS, I think sometimes it's the leisure industry being aware of what the focus is, and I suppose being reactionary to that. I think, it's a bit swings and roundabouts, because to some extent we have to influence how the money is being spent, but equally I think we need to be aware of what is the focus, so I think that's something that's important as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it would be really absolutely understand those types of things, and I think it's incumbent upon us to understand, to build relationships first and to understand each other's challenges. I suppose if you might well have given us those things now, but if you were to give us a piece of advice as to how to amplify the benefits that we could bring, or what are the things that we perhaps don't have but could have that would enable us to provide better support to the health service?
So I think having the integrated care boards is a huge opportunity. So again, we're really lucky in Greater Manchester because we are quite joined up. We've got GM Active, we've got GM Moving. So already, as part of the ICB, the Integrated Care Board, you've got exercise and physical activity as a focus. And again, we've got our very forward-thinking Mayor, Andy Burnham, who equally understands the importance of exercise. So I think that's really important. So in the areas of the country where that's not as strong, that would be an obvious quick win, making sure that within those integrated care boards that there is a very clear strand of focus around movement, around physical activity, around leisure, around exercise, and it's embedded within the ICB system, because that means that every conversation that goes on, when solutions are being looked for, there's somebody at the table who's bringing up what the leisure industry can offer, and not doing it in a kind of competitive way, doing it in a actually, this is information that you might not be aware of. I mean, I suppose that's what I was getting at before. A lot of this in my mind comes down to ignorance, and I don't mean that in a negative way. It's not willful ignorance. I think it's just completely just people just not having the awareness. So I think it's, information is power, and I think making sure that you've got the right people in those conversations. Obviously, you've got things like Sports England, UK Active. It's making sure that they're linked into the right situations as well. I think that would be a good start. Absolutely.
No, brilliant. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's good advice. I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned UK Active, already mentioned Mike Farrar, and he's working with 5 ICBs, including GM, who have agreed to be exemplar ICBs to work with our sector and to sort of showcase, I guess, more what we're doing. And obviously prehab is massively up there, but also plenty of other things that are going on as well. So that's great advice, Zoe. You did mention this earlier, but technology, specifically with prehab, I guess, how can technology help, particularly when we're looking to scale up and really sort of deliver on volume? Any thoughts on what technology, certainly from your perspective, what are the plans on the technology side of things?
So I did mention it before. I should have done, but as well as the other things that I've been involved in, myself, John, and others have been involved in a research study called EMBRACE, which stands for Enhanced Monitoring and Better Care for Cancer Patients in Greater Manchester.
So we love an acronym.
But essentially what this was about, it was about giving out wearable devices to cancer patients. So an Asansis watch, Asansis monitors, Aura rings, and then a Withings scan watch. And the focus wasn't really on exercise. It was more on the fact that cancer patients often spend a lot of time at home where they're not being monitored and we're not really aware of what's going on. And so some of it was just the feasibility of somebody wearing wearable devices as they go through a pathway. But actually, we did some qualitative research with this and we talked to patients about it. And one of the really clear themes that came out was how much the patients that were engaging in it was motivating them to do more physical activity. So just seeing their step count, just seeing, what they were doing on a day to day, seeing their sleep patterns. It actually, many of them were reporting that they would go out for an extra walk or they would do this or they would do that. And one of the big questions that we've been asking ourselves when we think about how can we scale up prehab is just the physical manpower needed to do face-to-face delivery of this offer. And actually, for me, being able to give out those wearable devices to people, not only from being able to monitor patients and being able to kind of where you need to step in and intervene, offering it to that patient, but just as a kind of behavioural change tool themselves, especially because sadly, when people go for any kind of healthcare or health condition, it's a teachable moment. It is a moment that makes people take stock and think, right, what am I going to do? How am I going to make some impact here? So I think wearable devices are really key. And already in the prehab service, we've used MyZone, so heart rate monitors, which was instrumental during the pandemic. The team absolutely thrived on using those to kind of be able to remotely support patients. There's apps, obviously, which we need to think about. But I think my nervousness sometimes is about how we tailor those to individuals and how we make sure, because whenever you speak to anybody about what's effective and what's made the difference, it's the person, the people who are involved. So I think we have to be careful with that. I think the beauty of digital technology will be when it's very much embedded within face-to-face delivery already. And so you've got that opportunity to flex what you're doing. And again, it's needs-based. It comes back to what does the patient need at any one time. So it's not, we're just going to do a digital version over here and we're just going to do face-to-face here. It's actually, Mrs. Jones might need something that's face-to-face now and then she might need something that's digital then. And we can, if you've got the ability to, you've got a toolbox of different opportunities, then you can do that.
It's fascinating, Zoe. And I think something that we need to work on both in GM, but probably wider as that as well, is that work going on the back of prehab, if you like, and where that might go is absolutely gold dust to our sector as a whole, for all the things that we do. So I think having a sort of collaborative approach, even more than we do now, on some of this research and development, and I guess it's, as usual, it's finding the resources to do that, but that's something that I think we challenge for us to figure out how we can do that and bring the likes of maybe UK Active research resources to GM to work with us on that. I think would be fascinating.
Absolutely.
Right. We've got, in the best tradition of this podcast, has been going for so long, it's established for at least one day, the quick fire questions for all. So we've got a few quick fire questions, which again, your perspective on this would be really interesting. But the first one is, we anticipate an election this year. There could be there will be a new government one colour or another. In relation to what we've talked about today, what one thing would you wish an incoming government to do?
Funding. Just long and short of it, with many of the issues that we're facing and the inequity in what we're currently doing is based on the lack of funding. It's based on us being in a situation where there is just not the funding available. So I think I appreciate people will say it's not always about throwing money at a situation. It is about working smarter, not harder. But equally, I think that if there was just extra funding available, we would be able to scale up what we're doing already, make sure that every patient receives it. We wouldn't be giving the same thing to everyone. That wouldn't be the intention, but it would allow us to really understand who's going to benefit the most from what version of a delivery, and then deliver that for them and get those outcomes that we need. And as a result, there would be massive savings for the healthcare system because we know that there would. So I think that injection of funding would be really hugely helpful.
Yeah, that funding with the knowledge that investment has a return.
Yeah.
Okay.
But one of the things that struck me right back 45 minutes ago when we first started was you talked about when you're talking about what gets you out of bed in the morning and your passion and why you do what you do. And you use the phrase, what really matters to me is that I get the opportunity to improve the lives of other people. Coincidentally, Stockport Active CIC, who I have the privilege of heading up, that's our purpose. That's our stated purpose. We exist to improve the lives of others. So in the context of collaboration, it seems like we've got things in common.
Yes.
Politically, we currently sit in the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. Given where we're heading, would we be better off within the Department of Health?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends because I suppose as an industry, and apologies if I've misunderstood this, but it feels like the scope of your industry is wide. There are some people that use your industry because they're sports focused, because they want to be pro athletes, because of all of those reasons. You've got the educational side of clubs and kids and schools and all of that, swimming lessons, etc. And then you've got this strand that's focused on health. So I don't know. I think there would be benefits from being in the Department of Health. I don't personally feel that it would be crucial to do that to get the outcomes that we're looking for. I think that's a bit of a red herring. I don't think that's the golden bullet.
Yeah.
I think what we actually have to do is within healthcare, we have to just make sure that this is embedded. But that doesn't mean that it has to sit within the Department of Health to do that. Because there's lots of different elements of what we do within the NHS that doesn't directly sit within the Department of Health. So that would be my view.
No, fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Zoe. Thank you. So just from where you sit, looking at our sector, are you optimistic about the future of our sector? I
am optimistic based on potential change in government. I think that I'm optimistic in that we're absolutely showing benefits of what your sector does. And that's not just in Greater Manchester, that's nationally we're seeing that. Okay. And that can only grow. And to be fair, you could take the view that actually in a cash-strapped system, people have to think outside the box, they have to be creative. And actually, if you've got examples of where health and leisure have come together and shown a return on investment, that's an opportunity. So I am optimistic. I suppose the issue is the kind of keeping the lights on. Yeah. And, again, with my limited understanding, it's understanding the costs that are involved in the industry, and it's about making sure that those costs are covered and that it's a sustainable industry. I suppose that would be the thing that would be of concern. Yeah. But in terms of me understanding what the outcomes that can be achieved via this industry, I would be very optimistic.
Excellent. We'll take that.
Thank you. Exactly. I'm done.
Can you just very final question, Zoe? In terms of us basically unearthing other people to talk to, who could you think of? Just one person who you think we should talk to get a similar perspective or from that side of the fence, shall we say? Who else could we talk to?
Well, obviously, Dr. John Moore would be an obvious, but another colleague of mine, Professor Matt Everson, who is a lung respiratory physician based at Wythenshawe Hospital, Manchester Foundation Trust, but he's also one of the assistant medical directors for the Cancer Alliance. I think he would be a brilliant person to speak to because, you know, he has been close to the delivery of prehab, but he sees those cancer patients in front of him on a day-to-day. You know, he is right at the heart. And a big focus of the work he does, as well as being a massive champion of prehab, but it's also focused around treating tobacco dependency. Right. And actually the importance, you know, again, if we think about these really simple interventions that have such huge difference, exercise is medicine. Actually, often in most cases, if you take current smokers and you support them to stop smoking, the impact that's going to have in terms of improving their current health condition, but also preventing future health conditions is huge. So I would definitely say Matt would be a brilliant person to speak to.
Fantastic. Well, I shall bother you for his details. I shall track him down. Zoe, absolutely fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. Gold dust. Lots of little nuggets in there that we'll be picking up. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Zoe.